Well, let me respond first of all by saying, as I've said before, and as the Secretary General himself has said, that violence is not a pathway to a resolution of the conflict. And bearing that in mind, I would want to see the cessation of violence as soon as possible in order to ensure and to minimize the loss of human life and to minimize the risk to civilians, bearing in mind that most of the people directly affected thus far on both sides have in fact been civilians. So I would want to call a halt to the hostilities and for there to be the engagement of a diplomatic process that can lead to a secure pathway for peace in the Middle East based on the two-state solution.
Right. So, any measures or actions planned by United Nations to resolve the conflict?
Well, the United Nations, as you know, is always the home of diplomacy, negotiation, and discourse. And those realities exist. Um, uh, we are willing to play that role in all situations of conflict. Uh, so, my hope is that the combatants will recognize the importance of reverting to a process of dialogue in order to save lives and to minimize the destruction and the harm that results from violent engagement.
Right. So,
I'm
India,
also concerned that adequate provision is made to assist and support those citizens, on both sides, who are in need of humanitarian care and support.
right. So, India has been pitching for United Nations reforms and a permanent seat at United Nations Security Council. What will you say on that, and when can we expect India on that high table?
Um, well, what I can say is, first of all, to congratulate India on its ambitions to become a member of the UN Security Council. It is quite a weighty responsibility to become a member of the Council, but also to become a permanent member is an extremely weighty responsibility, one which I am sure is not beyond the capacity of the government of India to shoulder. The question of when that will happen, that will be a question for the members of the United Nations to decide in the context of the reform agenda that's taking place vis-a-vis the Security Council. And let me emphasize, consistent with what I've said before, that Security Council reform is not an event. It's a process. In fact, it's an ongoing process. So that the timetable for there to be a reformed Security Council remains uncertain, though work is continuing at the level of the committee to address issues relevant to the reform of the council.
Right. So, how do you see India's role in the as the largest troop contributor in U.S. peacekeeping missions?
Um, I interpret India's high level of commitment to UN peacekeeping as being indicative of its continued faith in and dedication to the core values and principles of the United Nations. Uh, uh, Principles that are enshrined in the Charter of the UN, to which we all subscribe and should always seek to abide. It is only by observing and fulfilling these principles that we are able to guarantee international peace and security, and the preeminence of international law. India's role as a top contributor to UN peacekeeping is seen in that light as, in a sense, an underwriter of the principles enshrined in the Charter, and a role that is very much valued by the United Nations system. There's no doubt whatsoever that India is committed beyond rhetoric, in action, in boots on the ground. And may I also say that India was one of the first countries, I think the very first, to have assigned female peacekeepers on the ground. That is a move in the right direction, and it indicates a considerable degree of maturity and equity on the part of successive governments of India to demonstrate its commitment to the international system and to international peace and security.
Right. So during India's G20 presidency, inclusion of African Union was one of the landmark outcomes that we see. How do you see that? And as we speak, the Tanzanian president is also on India visit. So how do you see that African Union inclusion and India acting as a voice of global South?
A master stroke. A master stroke. India has been a voice of the global South for some time. I think the inclusion of South Africa on the G20 really constitutes a defining moment for the G20, because for the first time, there's the opening of the door to the interests and issues that are germane to countries in the global South. So this is a stellar achievement made by Prime Minister Modi and his government. I congratulate them warmly and deservingly for understanding, and not just understanding, but acting on the strategic importance of that inclusion. And I know that this will remain an issue that will define for a long time to come the extraordinary success of the Indian presidency of the G20.
So just last question, I know you need to go. How do you think India can be a role model to the world, and how do you see India flourishing under the leadership of Prime Minister Modi?
India is already a role model to the world. So many different cultures, so many different languages coexisting, albeit in a very large space. But India is a very diverse and rich country. And that in itself is a powerful message for political success. I think India also has many lessons that it can share, not just with the global South, but with the entire international community. The work that has been done on mastering technology, work that has been done on researching grains, and the potential contribution that that can make to global food security at a time when uh, there is rising global food insecurity, makes India a go-to candidate for how to. Um, it's quite an extraordinary success India has experienced over the last 25 or 30 years. And I have no doubt that through the creativity and ingenuity of the Indian people, that country will continue to grow, become even more diversified, and be increasingly more integrated into the global economic system. So there's a lot that we can all learn from India, and valuable lessons in economic development and sustainable development. And I want to encourage the Indian people to continue to generate the innovations that they have been doing that can help and support all of us in the rest of the world to becoming safer, wealthier, and with a higher level of balance or equilibrium towards our planetary environment.